Can art be a practical career? Can you really make a living as an artist? And let's be honest, did your parents hit you with the classic, art, really? Well, guess what? It's time to bust those myths and dive into the journey of someone who turned their passion for art into a thriving practical career. Welcome back to Career Calling, your ultimate guide to navigating the world of work, one profession at a time, to help you find your calling and turn it into a career. I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. Today, I'm presenting arts professionals who masterfully put the right brain and the left brain together to work, juggling spreadsheets and spotlights, budgets and brushstrokes, to keep the arts world thriving, the art administrators. My guest today is Dimitri Braxton. Dimitri Braxton is the Executive Director of Fruit Division, an arts organization dedicated to uplifting and empowering emerging artists in San Francisco. He's also an independent curator and practicing artist based in his hometown of Oakland, California. His artwork has been exhibited internationally and most recently at the DeYoung Museum, Crocker Art Museum, and Art Gallery of Alberta. His artwork is held in several private and public collections and was recently acquired by Monterey Art Museum, the DeYoung Museum, and the Crocker Art Museum. He is represented by Patricia Sweeto Gallery in Los Angeles, California. Braxton holds an MA in Museum Studies from San Francisco State University and Bachelor of Fine Arts from UC Berkeley in art practice. Hi, Dimitri. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really thrilled to be able to have an opportunity to tell another facet of the world of artists today. I have had in the past guests who were in art therapy and things like that. So today I'm really eagerly waiting to hear about what art administrators do. So let's start from there. Help me understand, what do art administrators do?
Yeah, so I recently started a job. Actually, I'm just a month in as the executive director of an arts organization in San Francisco called Root Division. And being the administrator for this, basically, I am responsible for raising all the money along with the board as well, and some of my staff members to sustain the organization, coming up with the policies and the procedures for how this place operates, and then really putting on events and helping to amplify the work of the artists that are within the space. It's an interesting role to play. I myself am a practicing visual artist. And if we think about the different sides of the brain, my art practice is thinking about the creative side of my brain, the right side, where being an administrator is very much thinking about details on the other side of the brain, where it's about organizing and making sure essentially that the organization stays afloat and is heading into the direction that our strategic plan and as well as just the vision and mission of the place, that we're moving along in that direction. So it's interesting for me to be able to practice at different points of my day, thinking very creatively when I'm in my art practice. And then within this role is very kind of pragmatic in thinking of systems and implementing them and sticking to timelines and grants, because I work in a nonprofit. So a lot of the funding comes from grants. A huge part actually comes from grants, but then also, meeting with potential individual donors and getting them excited about our mission and kind of welcoming them in with different parts of the organization that they can personally get involved in to ultimately fulfill their own personal mission when it comes to the arts.
Awesome. What type of organizations tend to have art administrators?
So my background is mostly in museums. So I've spent the majority of my adult life working within museums, about 20 years of it, working within the museum field. But there's a lot of museums across the country, but there are much more of these smaller arts organizations that are dedicated to different facets of the arts. And so I'm in the visual arts. I should be really clear about that. And so these are artists that are working primarily on 2-dimensional, sometimes 3-dimensional works. We do have a couple that work with an audio, but that's their personal practice. And then at least one that works within performance arts. But there's also performing art organizations. I did a little stint for 6 years where I was a curator for a civic arts collection for the
Mhm.
city of Berkeley. And so a lot of folks wouldn't know about that. I certainly didn't know that existed until a
Mhm.
professor told me that I should apply. It was really interesting. This was working directly with the city of Berkeley to
Mhm.
help them organize exhibitions for the public and then also to jury public art projects. And I've worked with the city of San Francisco, their Civic Arts Commission as well. If you can think of any form of art, there's probably an organization not too
Mhm.
far from you that is working within that field. Thinking of another one here in Oakland and there's also another one in San Francisco that works with adults with developmental and physical disabilities or that are differently abled. But yeah, the sky is the limit in terms of the types of arts organizations that need administrators, right? Because oftentimes organizations like my organization was started by a group of artists that were friends, and they had this vision for amplifying the work of emerging artists. So these are artists that are straight out of undergraduate school, sometimes not even into the art school or undergraduate route, just coming straight out of high school. And they wanted to have a place where they could learn to be professional artists, put on exhibitions, and then also do community service. Well,
Mhm.
those people don't often stay within the roles for very long. And so, really, to be able to sustain an organization and take it to the next level, you need to start bringing in administrators to make sure that finances are kept in order, that staff is properly supervised, and yeah, and then that the money is managed correctly.
Right.
Because, especially as a nonprofit, our money comes from state and local and then even individual donors. And so it's essential that there is someone at the helm that is making sure that the money is spent the way that it was supposed to be spent and just that there are no issues so that people don't get very upset about how money is being spent, basically.
Does it differ greatly in museums than these independent organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think most museums have really large staff. So I came from a museum, which was actually considered pretty small, with that had 30 staff members. But there's a place, you're in the Bay Area, but it's also, so if you think about a place like SF MoMA, they've got like 700 to 800 staff members, right? My
Wow.
organization has seven, very different scale. And with museums, oftentimes museums when people think of museum staff, you think of the person at the front desk, you think about the curator that's putting on the show, and then sometimes you may think about the leader of the museum. Within museums, there's all of the staff that you see at the front, making things happen, putting on exhibitions, inviting guests in, maybe even education staff that are leading tours. But there's a whole plethora of people behind the scenes, the people who are registrars who basically make sure that the work is protected, that the records are kept in the database. There are people who raise money, the whole development department. There's marketing and communications department. I mean, there's so many roles within a museum that we don't get to see. If you're not familiar with the infrastructure of a museum, you probably would have no idea that there's all these people that are taking condition reports for art to see if there's any damage, making sure there's no moths in the building, different things like that, packaging the art, shipping it, making sure that the work gets installed properly. So within my organization, we have a lot of those roles, but it's because we're such a small team, individuals will oftentimes occupy multiple roles. So the person who is in charge of the facility, the building, actually right now is helping to install artwork, is helping to prepare the walls, is helping to organize the events. And so I think that's probably the big difference. A lot of these smaller arts organizations, we kind of have to wear multiple hats, which is helpful, right? I've worked in so many different capacities. So there's not a lot within the art world that I don't know how to do. I may not be an expert, but I at least know the basics of them. And working for an organization like that, it's like this, it's really helpful because I can kind of tap into all these experiences that I've had over my 20 plus year career. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So it's like in tech speak, we're in Bay Area. So in tech industry speak, it's the difference between the large organization and startups, basically.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. perpetually stay in the startup space.
Oh, there are many in tech too. Don't worry.
Okay.
Perpetually stay in startup
Yeah.
mode. You also have done played a curatorial role in many places, and that's your education background as well. Looks like I was very curious to learn what do curators what do they do? Tell me a little bit about that space.
Yeah, curatorial work is really fascinating. I have spoken in front of lots of college student groups, and the way that I really like to there's different approaches to curatorial work, right? For me, am approaching a curatorial project, I think about it as an essay. So
Hmm.
I will have an idea, and that will be my thesis. So my thesis may be, I don't know, the prevalence of women artists who focus on identity in their work or something like that. That'll be my thesis. Then I
Mm.
get to go out and identify different artists whose work serves as really the supporting paragraphs to that thesis. So that by the end of me putting together an exhibition, when someone walks through, maybe I'm giving them some things to think about, but hopefully they come up with their own conclusion. So that's kind of like my metaphor for curatorial work, or at least the best curatorial work in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, kind of just depending on what it is, you get to have this idea and then you get to approach, at least in the visual arts realm, different artists who are approaching whatever theme you've come up with from different angles. Sometimes it's the opposite, where I will have this idea and then I'll come across an artist and the artist completely changes that idea, right? Like as
Mhm.
soon as I see their work, I'm thinking that this artist is investigating a topic from a certain angle, but at the deeper that I get into that work, I realize that they're looking at this from a very different angle and it may change my thesis altogether. So it's really fun. It's a very creative process where you're really yeah, the idea is that you know that audience members are going to come in, and so you're constantly thinking about what do I want folks to take away from this experience when they see this work? How do I want them to be moved and to maybe see the world through a different lens after they finish this experience? Yeah, and then you just get to meet lots of artists and really develop these deep relationships with them. You've got to really understand, again, this is my opinion, the best curators there are curators who do this differently, right? You may love what an artist does, but you've got your own ideas and you're not interested in what that artist thinks with the
Uh-huh.
work at all. You want to kind of impose your own ideas on it. For me, I really like to get into the themes and the topics and whatever change that artist wants to see happen in the world through their work. And then I get to be that as a curator, that person that gets to amplify that voice and then put their work in dialogue with other artists. So it's really fun. It's also a very different use of the creative brain. It's like, how do I kind of orchestrate this experience for people to where you're seeing one piece in association with another, and then you're kind of drawing these ideas together. So
Mhm.
by the end, hopefully you leave with new thoughts. It's a kind of again, to go to my essay writing kind of metaphor, it's a way to really come up with a theme, illustrate that theme, and then let people kind of walk away with their own ideas and hopefully this changed perception of the world around them.
Mhm. Is curation mainly happens in the perspective of some sort of an exhibition, or is curation also you're curating artwork for a museum, for example? Is it done in that context?
Yeah, the main focus of curators is really to put together exhibitions. But sometimes, I've never been fortunate to be a big museum curator, not yet, at least in my career. But oftentimes, it's not just the exhibitions and the larger museums. You're not just putting together the exhibitions, you're coming up with the related public programs.
Mhm.
So bringing oftentimes different panelists together to then talk about the themes that are going on in the exhibition. And then in the really well-resourced organizations, we have so many across the Bay Area. Then there's also producing the catalog. And so that's
Mm.
a similar process where, you're inviting, oftentimes a curator is a contributing writer. They'll contribute an essay to the catalog, but then you're also bringing other scholars in to contribute writing about the exhibition. And then you publish this beautiful catalog that really lives on beyond the exhibition. that amasses together all the thoughts that you have about whatever theme you're exploring.
Who commissions curators or who hires curators? Is this a kind of a fixed role in the organizations, or is it more like a freelance type of work that you keep moving on from one on to
Oh,
another?
it varies so widely, right? So the big museums and organizations have dedicated curators, but
Hmm.
even those will contracted curators. For me, I've always been an independent curator. I've never had an official permanent role
Mm-hmm.
where I've been a curator. And that's been really fun for me. For example, I'm curating a show in Palo Alto next year that I was just approached by the museum. They had a theme and they were like, we want you to come in and curate this exhibition because we like the way that you think about art and we like the artists that you bring together. And then places like where I work at Root Division, we also accept proposals. So an emerging curator, someone who's never done it before, can submit a proposal for this idea that they have. You submit like a 1 or 2 page summary of what you're thinking of, what the themes are, including some examples of artists that you want to include because we are a visual arts organization. Maybe you want to include video. Maybe you want to have a performance happen during the run of the exhibition. And then that's reviewed by a curatorial panel that then decides what fits the exhibition schedule for the year, and then also kind of ties in with the other themes that we have for shows throughout the year. So there's so many different avenues that people can curate. My very first exhibition that I curated back in 2009, I just approached a community center and I had never done this before. I'd never curated an exhibition, but I had a really solid theme. And I already had a couple of artists that had agreed to be part of this show if I got it. And so I just approached them with this idea, 1 pager, and then a couple of examples of the artists and their work. And they said, we would love for you to do that. And then after getting accepted, then I started to build that show up with other artists because now I have a venue that I can show at. So sometimes you're paying a venue to have a show. Other times you're getting paid to do the show. And that's obviously the best scenario. But when you're starting off, it's sometimes you just have to do that free work to prove that you're able to pull it off.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. That who manages the funding part of it?
Yeah. So at my organization, it's often grant funded. And so we will receive grants each year to cover exhibitions. Some of the larger institutions, the ones that are operating at multiple or tens of millions of dollars a year, they oftentimes have an endowment for exhibitions that they can draw from. They'll have a few $1 million in the bank and they're just drawing off the interest every year to pay for the exhibitions.
There was a third facet of your career that really caught my eye. That is your work in the education field, designing and a lot of things in the education field you've done. Can you speak a little bit to that? What is that role? What does it involve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of want to give you a little bit of my background and history of how I ended
Uh-huh.
up
Yes.
within arts education. So for me, it's really something that I just kind of fell into, but not on purpose. When I was an undergraduate student at UC Berkeley studying visual arts, I had a professor who approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to make some money?" I was like, "Of course. What do I need to do?" And his name is Craig Nagasawa. He still teaches at UC Berkeley, and he had organized this program called Arts Bridge. And so it was taking art students. You had to take an introductory education course and then you were assigned to one of the local elementary schools, the public schools, to go in and teach. I had never considered teaching before, but at this time, they were paying us like $30 an hour, which was a ton of money at that time, which meant that I could really focus on school and just do a few hours each week and be able to pay my bills at the time. And so I went ahead and did it and then found out from the course that I actually loved teaching. So when I graduated from college, I didn't, as a practicing artist, it takes a really long time to be able to actually make a career out of being an artist to where you make enough money from selling your work to where you can pay your bills.
Mhm.
so, so for me, it was kind of a no-brainer to go into education. And so I immediately started off as a teaching artist, working multiple contracts through various organizations and schools. to kind of piece together enough money to pay my bills
Mhm.
until I was finally offered an education job full time at a museum. And I did that for about a year, moved back to, this was in Indianapolis, Indiana, moved back to California. And it just also seems like a no brainer. I had lots of experience working within schools as well as informal education within K through 12 schools. And then I also had informal education working for arts organizations. And so it's kind of something that I've always been involved in. I love it because it's again another facet of being a creative person. So I know how to be an artist and I know how to approach art creation for myself and when I'm creating a project. But it's really nice to be able to break that process down for others, whether that be kids all the way up to adults, to break down the creative process. I think a lot of people think that they are not capable of being an artist, that they're not creatives at all. And so I love breaking that down for people. It's like, no, it's a process, right? You have this
Mm.
vision,
Interesting.
but obviously no one just comes out the door making a masterpiece. We're not Van Gogh, born Van Goghs, right? You've got to put in a lot of work. And then there's certain things that you can learn. Like if you want to draw a figure accurately, there's a scientific process for learning how to do that, right? So you've got to learn how to shade, you've got to learn how to show form in 3 dimensions using 2 dimensional tools. And so I love breaking those things down for people in really small little bites to where they can make that discovery for themselves. So yeah, I've been in education. I've been all the way from an arts instructor or teaching artist all the way up to eventually we start moving up the ladder within organizations. And unfortunately, the higher you get within the organization, the further you get away from that direct instruction. But you know,
Mhm.
I love what I do because I get to empower those who are doing the roles that I used to do to be able to get paid and to be able to buy supplies, things like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Let's go back a little bit further down in your memory and tell me, when did you decide arts is the way to go? Like that, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to study, even as an undergrad student.
Mhm. So I did not have a traditional path whatsoever, unfortunately, or for I don't know if it was unfortunate or fortunate. I fell in love with art in high school. I took a photography course, and it wasn't until my senior year in high school that I took an actual traditional art class where, you know, painting and drawing. Absolutely fell in love with it. But when I went to time to actually junior year was when I started. But when it went to applying to college, I had parents who really wanted me to have a professional career. And then their idea of being an artist was not that. So when I went to apply for college, they were like, we're not going to support you if you go this art path. You've got to do something else. We want you to be a doctor or a lawyer or something professional so that we don't have to support you the rest of your life. And at the time, I kind of caved in. I was like, oh, like I need my parents to support me. I settled in on architecture actually. So I first went off to school for architecture, did it for a year and a half, hated every single moment of it, but hated it. There was nothing about architecture that really thrilled me. Especially, I did a couple of internships the summer before entering college and then also the summer after freshman year. The firm that I was at, it was the same firm. It was a very large one that did commercial construction or commercial projects. Everyone hated their job. And they kept telling me, they were like, oh, you go to architecture school and you think you're going to get to design all these amazing buildings. You're not. One of the jobs that I had was going into AutoCAD, which is the design program, and moving electrical outlets to fit within code. I came to find out that was actually someone's full-time job. Like they went through all this year of schooling and that was what they were stuck with. So I decided I didn't want to do it. I ended up after the first semester of my sophomore year, I withdrew or before
Mm.
that semester ended, I withdrew from college altogether, told my parents that I was not going to go back to school unless I went back for art. They were finally like, okay, we just need you to graduate. We want you to have a degree. So go ahead and do it. And kind of the rest is history for me. I instantly fell in love with it. And wanted to prove my parents wrong that I could make a career out of being an artist. I'm
Mhm.
not making a career off of purely being an artist, but it taught me a lot of skills that transfer into the different jobs that I've had. Again, like having that experience with education gave me, or teaching
Mhm.
gave me doors into the fields of education. And then I've just always wanted to move up. Uh, and I ended up being hired as a coordinator at my first museum job here in San Francisco. And I essentially was taking over for a director and doing the same role as a director. Finally, after a few weeks, I asked the director, the museum's executive director, like, why am I doing the same work as the director of education, but I'm getting paid so much less? She told me that I couldn't get that title unless I had a master's degree. So a
Mhm.
couple weeks later, I enrolled in a master's program. I was like, I need to get paid more. I want to continue to move up within the field. So I'm going to get a master's in museum studies, and literally applied just a few weeks later. And within a few months, I was in that program. And then finally was able to get promoted up to director. After that, did that role for about 9 years, and then this executive director position opened up at a different organization, and it just made sense. Again,
Mhm.
moving up within the trajectory of my professional career.
What a great story. I think what's really strikes me is that it seems like right from the beginning, you had a very practical approach to how you want to make a career out of, in the artistic lane, right? Tell me more about that. Where did you get that idea? Like, was it your undergrad days or was it some professor? How did you think that I love art? Instead of thinking I love arts, I'm going to make art and make my money. How did you think about I will go into all these other possibilities out there? Where was that exposure coming from?
Yeah, I would say that I had amazing professors and undergraduate. These were people who were making art on the side. When you teach art at the university level, they require you to also have a personal practice. You have to have so many exhibitions per year to be able to maintain your status as a professor, particularly if you are tenure tracked. Then you've got to continue to show and have different exhibitions, and you've got to have this parallel career path of your art practice as well as your teaching practice. So seeing just so many amazing folks at UC Berkeley that were doing this and that
Mhm.
were living fulfilled, satisfied lives, for me, were just really nailed home that you can do it. I ended up not going that route because I didn't want to go, to a terminal degree at the time. And there's parts about the university life that appealed to me, but there's other parts that didn't. One of the things is like within the university system, particularly within the arts, there's a very low glass ceiling for how much you can get paid. And I knew for myself, I was like, I can't be settled on that little bit of money. I need to make more. So I started really just looking at possibilities for how I can make more money. If I'm being honest, I did not become a full-time art teacher within the classroom. I had friends who did that within public education. And again, for me, it was like, that's the maximum that you could make. I want to make more than that. And so for me, it was really just finding different pathways to where my career like met both my passions, but then also paid me the kind of salary that I wanted to have a comfortable lifestyle. And so I found that within museums, you can easily go online. I like to go onto Glassdoor and kind of look at salary surveys to just kind of see what is possible within a field, which they vary widely, right? So like at some of the larger museums here in San Francisco, the entry level position maybe pays like 50,000, but then you'll see the executive director at some of these museums, they're making like almost $1 million a year. So
Oh,
there's this
wow.
just wide range of salaries within the field. And I knew that I could find myself in a comfortable spot somewhere in between there.
I wouldn't have known the the field because when it comes to arts, fine arts, we only think of an artist who is
Yeah.
creating the art. There may be many who probably, young students or families that are in the same bind as you were, where they're interested in arts, but they don't think of it as a viable career option. Let's talk a little bit more. Is it essential to take your plan, your education in a certain way? Like you went in to do masters in curatorial studies. What are the paths there? Like how should one plan so that they can make it a viable career? What role does the education play?
That's a really interesting question because I know so many people who have taken alternative paths. There's a museum director in Florida, Franklin Sermons. He does not have a master's degree. He has his bachelor's degree, and he started off by being an independent curator. So he would, like I was saying earlier, he would pitch all of these exhibitions. Now, that pathway takes a really long time. So Franklin was probably doing independent curatorial projects for probably 15 years. And I'm sure he had other jobs on the side to be able to
Mhm.
sustain himself because contracts are not consistent. But then he got an opportunity to curate a big show at the Met Museum in New York, which is probably the most prestigious museum in the country. And it was widely successful. And someone thought he was amazing and offered him to be the executive director of the Perez Art Museum in Miami. So that's a pathway within the arts. It's very untraditional
Mm.
for most people, particularly within the arts. I hate to say it, but the idea is like you really do have to go through some level of struggle because the art profession, for the most part, does not pay very well. It's not a very stable field. And so a lot of people, like I piecemealed together right after undergraduate. I don't know. I was probably working like upwards of 10 different contract positions at a time to just be able to pay all of my bills, including
Mhm.
student loan payments. And for me, I did not plan that out very well. After doing that for a couple of years, I was like, this is not the life that I want to live. So you end up working much more than 40 hours a week. And because everything's contract, you're not eligible for health benefits and vacation. It was a situation where if I got sick and I didn't work, I just wasn't getting paid. So for me, it was like, I need to change this. I need a 9 to 5 position with benefits. So this was me talking to the person who hired me on contract to try to figure out if I could get into a full-time position. And that took a while, right? I think people that I see who do this more successfully and more streamlined, you either have that vision, like I want to be a curator, which often means an advanced degree. So those
Mhm.
are the kinds of people who go straight from a bachelor's program to a master's degree, and then sometimes even go immediately into a PhD. Because if you want the most options as a curator, for example, you really do need that PhD. You need to have a focused area of expertise that you can prove. And even still, I know people who have gone that route, and oftentimes you start as an assistant curator. That's the only job that you're given. And at some of these museums, after you've paid, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars for your degree, you're coming into like a 55, maybe $60,000 position that you have to move yourself up the ladder. And the arts, oftentimes, in other aspects of art roles, oftentimes that's kind of what the pathway unfortunately looks like. And it's like anything else, it's really about connection. So there are people who have done multiple internships, they've connected with the right people throughout their educational path, and they immediately find themselves into skipping a few of those levels and not having to start off at the base level.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than a lot of other traditional careers. And I think that's what my parents wanted me to avoid because they
Mhm.
had gone through that and they're like, we don't want you to struggle the way we did. Go be a doctor, go be a lawyer, go be something to where you're guaranteed a really good paycheck right after you graduate.
Mhm. You talked about the non-traditional path of after undergrad being curator. Taking that to the extreme, there are a lot of people who may be artists, but they may not have any formal education. Can they do like is there a possibility for them to explore that non-traditional path, or is there a minimum barrier of formal education?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on the role, right? And fortunately, within the arts ecosystem, that's starting to change. So there's a lot, particularly since 2020,
Mhm.
when we had the global pandemic, and then there's been kind of a light shined on, the inequalities of our society. there's a lot of arts organizations that are trying to remove the barriers, right? It looks like who who needs to go through these 8 years of grueling schooling to come out and make less than what someone who's a manager at McDonald's can make? Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? Uh,
Hmm.
to do that, if you want to make $55,000, just go straight into being a manager at a fast food chain, because in San Francisco you can make that. There's a lot of organizations that are trying to remove that barrier and that are also substituting experience for those degrees. Um, but again, I think you just really have to have a very strong work ethic. You have to prove yourself. Sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do to be able to move up the ladder of progression within an organization if you don't have those advanced degrees. I did find for me personally, like, I immediately made 50% more in my salary once I had that master's degree. So it was just a faster pathway to get to where I felt like I needed to be financially. But yeah, you certainly can do it in a few more years of really putting in the hard work within the industry if you don't have those advanced degrees.
Makes sense. Now, you talked about as an administrator or even the curator, there are a lot of other trades or skills needed, including managing finances or a lot of project management, maybe the communication. Does the degree prepare you for these things, or is it something that you acquired outside? Like, I was very, when you were explaining, I was thinking a lot of those things could be any general business administration, right? Like
Yeah.
administration skills. Does the arts degree, whether it's undergrad or a grad school, does it also mix in these skills to prepare artists for more practical career paths?
That is a wonderful question. And unfortunately, what I find time and time again is those are still not taught.
Oh,
It's like they just teach you how to be an artist and how to do that very traditional
mm,
career that everybody idealizes that only a very small percentage actually get to do. So unfortunately, that is a continual issue. That's also part of the reason for me why I didn't decide to go on a traditional Master's of Fine Art degree program for graduate studies. I do want to do that eventually, just to have the 2 straight years to just dedicate to art practice and to hopefully move my practice to another level. But I chose intentionally a museum studies program for my master's program because it touches upon everything. Even though I focused on education and curatorial practice within my master's degree program, they teach you just the basics of registration, collections management, museum administration, finances, writing grants, and just this whole gamut. You get a little bit of everything, and then you get to specialize in whatever you really want to focus on. So for me, that kind of degree gave me lots of skills that even if I didn't use them immediately, I still understand them enough to where I can tap into them. And certainly I'm not an expert on things. And so as I enter into this role where I need to be able to have a stronger basis in financial management, I'm going to YouTube University and LinkedIn University and different kinds of resources to be able to strengthen those skills. But at least I graduated with the very basic understanding of how these things work.
hmm hmm. Yeah. So today is a world of specializations. I hope some business school also kind of introduces. There are a lot of cross sections coming together, like business administrations in healthcare or
Yeah.
space and stuff like that. Maybe the two worlds need to come together at some
They
point.
do. That would be so fascinating, actually, and really helpful for people to be able to understand. Because even if you do trot that path of becoming a practicing artist full time, you need to be able to understand how to manage your finances. You need to be able to understand how to get grants and how to apply to public art calls. You need to, hopefully, if your business starts to thrive as an artist, you need to start hiring staff. And so
Mm.
once you do that, it's like you need to be able to do payroll and payroll taxes, and things get more complicated as you move on and your business develops. And those are unfortunately skills that are not taught, at least within the United States
Yeah.
context of schooling for artists. They're just like, figure it out on your own.
Mhm. That was my another question. The degrees or the practices that are there, how international they are. Like, can somebody who has been a curator or a arts administrator easily switch between the countries, or those are completely siloed?
That they're siloed. So fortunately, yeah, it's not like being in the medical field where you've got to get specialty license within that country. There are lots of curators who are actually are international. And at the last museum that I worked at, we were hiring an associate curator, and we were really focusing on people who could bring in the international perspective. So the De Young here in San Francisco, for their African art curatorial head, she came directly from South Africa. And they wanted people who had that international experience and those connections. So that the arts are really awesome for that. Like, you do not need to get recertified in anything to be able to do the work in another country. And in
Uh-huh.
fact, I've had art exhibitions. I mean, it's not far off and fancy in Canada, for example, but I was able to work there. There's opportunities where I can work in England.
Okay.
There's an artist residency that I want to apply to that's in Japan. So the world is really open to you within the arts field. And so that part is really amazing. There are
Hmm.
also leaders of organizations that have come internationally, particularly for organizations that have an international focus, like the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco brings in folks from different parts of Asia to run departments within the museum. So yeah,
Hmm. That's
very
amazing. So
international field.
yeah, that's amazing because especially in the Bay Area, I've seen a lot of people who come from different backgrounds other than tech. That is
Yeah,
one of the things that what do I do here? So that's good to know if there are some artists out there who happen to find themselves in Bay Area, they can explore, or anywhere in the US or anywhere in the world. Possibly they should
for
explore
sure.
this path. For the lot of the youngsters who are really artistic in nature and interest or listening, what are some of the resources would you advise they should look into to keep themselves educated and know about what happens beyond just creating art, right? How would they prepare? What would be your advice to them?
Ooh. I would just say going out, especially if you want a career within the arts, the art ecosystem is very closed. There's a very closed network, particularly here in the Bay Area. And so we tend to go with people that we already know.
Mm,
Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know what that is. And anyone who wants to be an artist or work within the arts needs to go out to openings. You need to be seen. You need to
mm,
introduce yourself to people and talk to them so that they start to know you. I've had people do that to me, young folks who have introduced themselves to me, and I'll meet them again 5 years later. You remember that, especially for a young person, because it's so rare that a young person wants to talk to an adult. And right, you will remember them. And so I've had instances where people have applied for internships or
mm,
positions, and I will remember that name, and do tend to only stick with people that we already know that are inside of our circle. So it's important to get yourself inside of that circle. In terms of finding more information, lots of museums, art universities, and colleges, they offer free programming. Some of them are online. And so you can
mm,
kind of find out what people's career pathways was. This one certainly is a great
mhm,
resource for folks. And I think also just reading some of the art magazines and newspapers. Like, there's one called the Art Newspaper that I
mhm,
subscribe to that has really great, it tells you about trends within the art world, sometimes scandals that are happening. It's really nice to kind of
mhm.
know those things and to be able to have conversations with people about what the trends are and how the field is changing. And then there's also just groups. I love Reddit, for example. I love getting on different groups within Reddit and having conversations with people. And I've actually met people. I've got international Reddit friends. A
Oh,
couple of
wow.
them I've actually met in person, to where you can just engage in dialogue with people. And sometimes that happens on Instagram, because Instagram is a very visual platform. It's
Mhm.
great for artists. It's great for art critics and other writers, as well as curators, because it's just such a visual platform, but you can engage in dialogue with people through that. And so I've met so many friends through Instagram and through Reddit. It's great. And then those are people that you know enough about that you want to work with. I just encourage young people to make as many connections as you can. If you find someone that inspires you, reach out to them. You'll be surprised how many people will actually respond, because You would think, oh, this person is just so well known. They'll never write back to me. I get those people writing back to me all the time. It's
Yeah,
actually really surprising.
I totally second that. This whole podcast is running because of that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
There are so many people who will respond. So yeah, totally agree. Finally, you kind of talked about the changing world. As an artist, I want to ask you, this indeed is a changing world with the whole artificial intelligence and everything.
Mhm.
And the biggest, at least the more visible area is a lot to do with the art. So as an artist, as a artistic community member, what do you think about it and how should young people protect or progress with it? What's your opinion on the whole development?
Yeah, I think I do not like AI generated artwork. Also, I'll just say that. And I think that there's a component to where, I mean, at least in the current iterations of AI, to where you can kind of tell if you look really deeply, there's always something that's slightly off about the artwork. There was that photographer, the international photographer that won the prize. And then he told them that, hey, I just wanted to test this out to see how it would do. If you would notice that this was actually generated by AI, there are certainly advanced tools within AI to where it can be believable. For me, I just prefer the human touch and the human, that there's just something visceral that I can't quite put my finger on artwork that's made by humans, by human labor and thoughts and ideas that I don't think a computer will ever be able to touch. What I do think AI is amazing for is for iteration and for ideation. And so I have played around with some of those tools, like the Dolly tool, for example, that
Yeah.
ChatGPT has. And it's really great to just be like, hey, what does a blue girl in a purple dress that's playing with a spiked dog look like? Like, give me that really interesting to kind of like quickly create almost a sketch of an idea that you have. But then I prefer when folks then take that and then they actually apply their own creative hand to the work. And I think also just so many benefits to not only you as a creator getting off of the computer and actually using your hands and touching materials. I mean, I think that's why ceramics within the tech community, there's a surge of all these ceramic studios popping up because I think people who deal with computers all day long. They want to touch something. And there's nothing more grounding than touching clay, this stuff that comes from the earth and seeing how it transforms. I think people need to do that. But I think also as consumers of art, there's something that you get from understanding the labor and the touch of the hand that goes into the work that I don't think a computer can ever replicate. But yeah, I know some amazing artists that use AI to generate incredible art, particularly art that lives online. And I think there is a place for it. I think they're fascinating. Is not my personal favorite form of art, but there are people who love it and more power to you for that. But I mean, I would just encourage people to also not give the AI all of the power to create whatever thoughts that you have to kind of explore that. Or even like I know a painter who does the initial sketch of their whole thing and then they go on and they paint it themselves. And when you see them side by side, even if the painter within some of the work, she's like really just replicating what she's seeing, there's a different feeling that comes from the
Mhm,
piece when there's the artist's hand involved.
mhm. Hopefully, it ends up being a category of its own. Like in music, you have techno music or
Yeah.
electric and like that.
It's true, right? Like, kind of keep that, and I guess there's a whole digital art platform, I forget the name of it, that's a new social media kind of alternative to Instagram that is all digital art. If that's your thing, there's a community for that. It's not my personal thing. It's not what I love because for me, I really love processes. I love material and I love trying to like kind of observing how an artist masters something that seems really challenging. And they're oftentimes using their own hands to do that.
Mhm. Dimitri, this is an awesome episode. I learned so much. I'm sure a lot of the youngsters who are like interested in getting into the art field learned a ton. Thank you so much for coming on the show and then sharing your knowledge and experience.
No, thank you so much for having me. This was a fantastic conversation. And next time I want to interview you.
Yes, absolutely. I may not have much to give to your community, but absolutely.
I'm sure you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Career Calling. I hope you found it helpful. I'll be back soon with more stories of professions from all walks of life to help you find your calling. Until then, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word.